Hello, you're watching Movie Snapshot Scenes, and this is the summary of Marriage Story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Love in the details. Charlie Barber was a man of structure, thoughtful, passionate, and fiercely dedicated to his craft as a theatre director in New York. Nicole, his wife, was an actress full of fire and charm, once a rising star in film who chose the stage and Charlie's vision over the Hollywood spotlight. They were partners in art and in life, co-creators of a small but celebrated theatre company, and seemingly inseparable. Their love, when spoken aloud, was full of reverence. Charlie admired Nicole's ability to light up a room, her generosity, her sensitivity, and the way she made everyone feel included. Nicole adored Charlie's intellect, his leadership, how he loved being a dad, and how effortlessly he fit into any situation. Their story, as they told it at first, sounded like a partnership sculpted out of respect and admiration. But beneath the carefully chosen words and the curated memories, things were already fraying. Nicole was feeling invisible. Over the years, her voice had softened, her needs put aside for the sake of Charlie's ambitions. He never listened the way he used to. Decisions that once felt mutual began to feel one-sided. She yearned for space, not just physical, but emotional, creative, spiritual. When she landed a pilot in Los Angeles, it felt like an escape hatch she didn't know she needed until it was opened. She took their son, Henry, with her, saying it was temporary, but a quiet shift had begun. Charlie, meanwhile, didn't see the cracks in the same way. He was blindsided when Nicole announced she wanted to separate. To him, their marriage was imperfect, but fixable. He thought they were just in a slump, like any couple. The idea of Nicole starting over in LA, away from their theatre and their home, felt like betrayal disguised as reinvention. Still, in the beginning, they agreed to keep it amicable. No lawyers, no fighting, just two adults working out a transition for the sake of their son. But even with the best intentions, the gravity of a relationship unraveling has a way of pulling people into darker places. What started as mutual understanding soon turned into miscommunication, then silence, then tension. Nicole settled in with her mother in California and began rediscovering parts of herself she had buried. Meanwhile, Charlie tried to keep everything steady in New York, refusing to believe that the center of his world was shifting for good. They were still tethered by Henry, still exchanging polite messages, still pretending that love, or at least civility, could smooth the path ahead. But the storm was only beginning to gather, and no amount of artistry or mutual respect could stop the inevitable transformation of their once shared life into two separate ones. Nicole never imagined she'd end up in a lawyer's office. She had promised Charlie and herself that their separation would remain civil, gentle, even. But once she met Nora Fanshawe, a poised and sharp family lawyer with a velvet voice and steel spine, Nicole realized that civility often has a price, and it's usually paid in silence. Nora didn't just talk about custody and assets. She spoke about freedom, about being heard, about taking up space in a world that too often rewarded the man for standing still, while the woman bent to accommodate. Nicole poured her story out, how she lost herself in Charlie's life, how her ideas were always folded into his vision, how she went from lead actress to background support in both their art and their marriage. And as she spoke, she began to reclaim her narrative, not as an accessory to Charlie's brilliance, but as a woman who once had a voice and was learning to use it again. Charlie, still in New York, was trying to keep things afloat, his theatre, his finances, his connection to Henry. He believed that what they had agreed on still stood. No lawyers, no mess. But Nicole's legal move shattered that illusion. She had filed for custody in California, and with that, the center of their universe shifted. Suddenly, Charlie was forced into a world he didn't understand, divorce court. He scrambled to find a California lawyer and was quickly overwhelmed by the performance of legal chess he was now a pawn in. His first attempt, a kind but ill-equipped attorney, only deepened his confusion. The rules were different here. Every move counted. Every hesitation looked like guilt. When he finally hired Jay Marotta, a fiery, no-nonsense lawyer who treated divorce like war, Charlie's approach hardened. What was once about love and mutual respect turned into a power struggle masked by legal jargon. Custody became a battlefield. Holidays, weekends, school decisions, all turned into negotiating chips. And in the center of it all was Henry, a boy too young to understand why his world was suddenly split into two zip codes and competing narratives. Nicole and Charlie, once collaborators, now spoke through lawyers and stared across courtrooms instead of into each other's eyes. The legal system didn't care about how much they once loved each other. It cared about jurisdiction, precedent, and paperwork. And slowly, they began to reflect the roles they were cast into. The mother seeking a fresh start, the father fighting to stay relevant in his son's life. The court didn't just expose their pain, it amplified it. Every flaw was examined, every slight remembered. And through it all, both Charlie and Nicole began to realize that ending a marriage wasn't just about separating a life. It was about surviving the dismantling of identity, love, and family under the harshest light possible. The emotional toll was beginning to show. Charlie had become a man in motion, constantly flying back and forth between New York and Los Angeles, trying to keep up appearances while slowly unraveling. The stage, once his sanctuary, now felt distant. His theatre company carried on without him, and his authority over the world he built began to slip through his fingers. He missed auditions, rehearsals, moments with Henry. The child's laughter, once a constant in their shared home, now echoed in unfamiliar places, scattered between scheduled visits and awkward handoffs. Nicole, on the other hand, was blooming, in quiet, unexpected ways. The California sun gave her room to breathe. For the first time in years, she felt autonomous. She was directing her own project, surrounded by a new community that listened to her ideas without filtering them through someone else's lens. Her relationship with her mother, once a background quirk in her life, became a support system. Even her sister chipped in, helping navigate the bizarre and painful steps of serving divorce papers. But with this growth came guilt. Nicole wasn't heartless. She could still see the man she once loved beneath Charlie's frustration. They were both hurting, both caught between who they were and who they were becoming. The moments of tenderness between them hadn't vanished completely. Every now and then, a glance would linger, or a memory would resurface. A joke, a smile, the rhythm of old routines. But these moments only deepened the ache. Charlie tried to hold on to something, anything that felt real. He attempted to connect with Henry, but their bond had become strained by distance and confusion. Henry didn't understand why Daddy had to leave again so soon, why his parents weren't in the same room anymore, why the rules kept changing. Charlie, desperate, even attempted to establish residency in California to improve his legal standing. It meant renting a small, impersonal apartment far from his New York roots and starting over in a city that never felt like home. Meanwhile, the case grew more combative. Legal fees mounted. Trust dissolved further. There were depositions, court-mandated, evaluations, and the dehumanizing process of dissecting their private lives in front of strangers. Everything was being measured. Who was the better parent? Who had the more stable home? Who wanted control? And who simply wanted to feel seen? Their love hadn't vanished overnight. It had eroded quietly, worn down by choices, silences, and years of putting the partnership ahead of the person. Now, in the heat of legal warfare, those suppressed grievances came pouring out, not in heartfelt conversations, but in statements, affidavits, and lawyer-led confrontations. The cracks beneath the surface had grown into canyons, and both Nicole and Charlie were left standing on opposite sides, unsure of how to cross, or if they even wanted to anymore. The breaking point. It was only a matter of time before all the pressure exploded. The unresolved emotions, the unspoken resentments, the false sense of control, they all converged into a single room where Charlie and Nicole sat face to face. No lawyers, no filters, just two people drowning in the weight of their shared history. What began as a discussion quickly turned into a confrontation. Nicole wanted acknowledgement, real acknowledgement, for the years she felt unseen, for the sacrifices she made, for the identity she lost in the shadow of Charlie's ambitions. Charlie, in turn, wanted to be understood. He didn't see himself as selfish, but as someone trying to build a life that included both their dreams. The more they spoke, the more their pain sharpened, becoming weapons instead of bridges. The fight escalated. Voices rose. Tears followed. Words were said that neither of them could take back. Nicole accused Charlie of always needing to be the center, of taking without giving. Charlie, desperate and cornered, shouted that he wished she were dead, then immediately broke down, horrified by his own words. The moment hung heavy in the air like smoke after a fire, thick, toxic, and lingering. This wasn't just a disagreement. It was the purging of years of disappointment, misunderstanding, and heartbreak. They weren't just fighting over custody or court decisions. They were mourning a dream, grieving a version of life that had already died but hadn't been buried. After the storm passed, silence returned. Not the kind born of peace, but the kind that follows devastation. They were both exhausted, and yet something strange lingered in the aftermath. Honesty. Brutal, raw honesty. For the first time in months, they had said everything. There was nothing left to pretend. As the legal battle trudged on, it became more mechanical. The paperwork continued. The custody arrangements were finalized. The theater company in New York moved on without Charlie, and Nicole's television pilot became a success. Life, in its cruel indifference, kept moving forward. Charlie began to realize that clinging to the past wouldn't bring it back. He stopped fighting so hard against the tide. He spent more intentional time with Henry, learning to be a father, on his own terms, not just a weekend guest in his son's life. He played, he listened, he showed up, even when it hurt. Nicole too softened. She saw Charlie not as her opponent, but as Henry's father, as someone who had once meant the world to her, and in a quiet way, still did. They weren't enemies. They were just two people who had failed to stay together and were now trying to succeed at being apart. The breaking point had nearly destroyed them, but in its wake, it left a strange kind of clarity, one that hurt, but also healed. Time didn't fix everything, but it softened the edges. By the time the court process neared its end, Nicole and Charlie had both changed, maybe not in who they were at their core, but in how they saw each other and the life they had shared. The wounds were still healing, and trust wasn't magically restored, but something unspoken had shifted between them. The fight was no longer the focus. Instead, there was a quiet acknowledgement that their story didn't have to end in bitterness. Nicole had settled into her new rhythm in Los Angeles. Her pilot was picked up, and she was directing episodes with confidence that had once been buried under compromise. She had a new partner, someone kind, present, and detached from her past life. But she wasn't rushing to rebuild what was lost. Instead, she was learning how to be alone without being lonely, how to define herself without needing approval. Charlie, too, had found a kind of peace. He accepted a residency with a prestigious theater company in Los Angeles, not as a way to chase Nicole or Henry, but as a new chapter in his own journey. He began renting a proper apartment, not just a legal placeholder. He decorated it. He cooked. He picked up Henry from school. Slowly, his time with his son became something deeper, routine, familiar, meaningful. There were bedtime stories, spilled juice, Halloween costumes, and inside jokes. It wasn't the life he planned, but it was becoming the life he chose. There was no grand reconciliation, no Hollywood moment of falling back in love. What emerged instead was something quieter and more human: mutual care, respect, a shared love for a little boy who had been the anchor through all the chaos. Henry, blissfully unaware of the storm he had weathered, seemed happy. He loved both, his parents, and somehow they were figuring out how to coexist for his sake, and perhaps even for their own. On Halloween, something small yet profound happened. Charlie, unable to secure a proper costume for Henry last minute, took him trick-or-treating, in Nicole's neighborhood anyway. Nicole, noticing the effort, invited them inside. It was awkward, but not tense. She offered Charlie food. They talked, briefly. Henry fell asleep in the car, and Nicole offered to let Charlie carry him up. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was just about being present. And then came the letter, the one Nicole had written during their first mediation session, listing all the things she loved about Charlie. He found it months later in her home, tucked away and half forgotten. He read it aloud, voice trembling, not just for himself, but for Henry. And in those words, full of warmth and history and heartbreak, Charlie rediscovered the beauty of what they had, even if it didn't last. Because sometimes, love doesn't end, it just changes shape. Love in a different language. The divorce was finalized. There was no parade, no celebration, just paperwork, signatures, and the quiet hum of an ending finally made official. But despite all the pain, all the legal battles, and all the raw words exchanged in courtrooms and kitchens, Nicole and Charlie had arrived at something that, in its own way, resembled peace. It wasn't the kind of peace born from forgetting, it was the kind forged in fire, earned through vulnerability, struggle, and painful growth. Charlie's new life in Los Angeles no longer felt like exile. It had transformed into a second act. He directed again, slowly rebuilding his sense of self outside the identity of husband. His bond with Henry had blossomed. He had learned to braid his son's hair, to make his favorite pancakes, to laugh when things went wrong. Fatherhood was no longer a part-time role forced into the margins of a custody schedule. It had become a living, breathing connection. Nicole was thriving too. She had won an Emmy for her work on the pilot and was taking on more creative control with each new project. Her voice, once buried beneath compromise, now guided entire productions. But even as she stood taller in her professional life, she never closed the door on the emotional truth of her past. She still kept pieces of Charlie around, not as regrets, but as reminders of who she had been and how far she'd come. One afternoon, as the sun cast golden light over the sidewalk, Nicole approached Charlie outside her house. She handed him Henry's backpack and casually mentioned a small detail. She had switched custody days to make things easier for him. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it said everything. Their dynamic had shifted. The hostility was gone. In its place was something else, something resembling friendship, or maybe just understanding. Charlie, moved by the simplicity of her kindness, bent down to tie Henry's shoe. It was a quiet, fatherly act, but also a symbol of his transformation. He wasn't trying to hold on to the past anymore. He was simply trying to be there, now. As he stood up, Nicole looked at him with a softness that had long been missing. Not romantic, not nostalgic, just kind. They shared a moment of silence. No need for explanation, no need for closure. Some stories don't end with a kiss. Some don't end with rage. Some just settle into memory, evolving with time. Charlie and Nicole had loved, fought, and let go. Not because they stopped caring, but because they learned that love, at its most honest, sometimes means allowing the other person to grow apart from you. Marriage Story wasn't about a divorce. It was about two people discovering who they were once love had burned through the fog. And in that clarity, they found not just endings, but the beginning of something new. Life, redefined,